Start with basic introductions so that people would know who you are.
Thanks for having me. So I'm Sabrina. I'm with the HBAR Foundation. So with the HBAR Foundation, it's the foundation that grows the ecosystem around the Hedera Layer 1 protocol. I'm building the ecosystem in the fintech and payment space. So of course, RWA is very central to that. We cover a number of different applications.
I'm Rushi, one of the co-founders of Movement. We're working on bringing the Move execution environment to Ethereum. And one of the core value props of Move is its ties with institutions. If you look at the major L1, so like Apperson Sui, there's a huge trend towards working with major institutional players like Hamilton Lane, BlackRock, etc. The thesis is Move is a very secure and fast execution environment. So when institutions put assets on chain, having a faith that it's not going to get hacked is the main focus of the Move language. So one thing we're working on is bringing RWAs to the Movement ecosystem. So excited to be here and chatting today.
Hey guys, my name is Teddy. I'm one of the co-founders here at Plume. At Plume, we're building a EVM permissionless network totally focused on RWAs. And we're focused on three core things. One is tooling, basically providing the necessary infrastructure to bring assets on chain from any asset issuer in any jurisdiction. Two, we're also focused on distribution. I think one of the core issues is, once assets are on chain, how do you get it in the right hands of the right counterparties? And three is composability. We're bringing essentially a new environment to let people trade and interact with different RWAs, and super excited to be here today to talk more about Plume.
Thanks everyone for being here, and it's actually quite exciting to see that this infrastructure around RWAs is building so fast. We started 3.5 years back, Polytrade. Nobody was talking about RWAs that time, and I'm so excited that we have 3 panelists who are doing so much on RWAs now. So let's directly hit the problem statement which is there, right? Over last 1.5 years, we have been partnered with 70+ projects across 11 chains, and we have realized that data fragmentation is a big issue today, and that is the reason most of the RWA adoption is taking time. So my first question is, fragmentation, as we all know, is a big issue in tokenizing real-world assets. What strategies are you implementing to create a more unified, interoperable ecosystem? Sabrina, you'll always be the first.
Sure, I'll take it. So I guess there's multiple types of fragmentation, right? So you mentioned data fragmentation. There's this fragmentation of token standards. That's one thing, right? So that's an area where we're working to improve some of the standards. Also, there's this kind of a gap, right, between what's on-chain, what's off-chain. So we're also working to help fill that gap, making sure there's more information on-chain. So there's a technical fragmentation. There's also the liquidity fragmentation. That's another area that we try to help our ecosystem to deal with that. So it could be as simple as connecting your ecosystem projects together to share liquidity. You may have one project that has a license in Dubai and another one a license in the US, et cetera, that they could like build on each other, right? So this is kind of like informal way that we help that happen. Obviously, we're very interested in plugging into aggregation layers, just like Polytrade and such. So I definitely see those platforms are going to be very important as RWA projects multiply, and we already have quite a vast ecosystem on Hedera. So Master MTN is an example. I know you guys have been involved in that, obviously. So we're also building on that. There's another company that was in your batch called FSCO. So you could do things like not just a swap, but like a delivery versus payment across multiple networks, which is getting very interesting. So I guess I don't really see. This still is going to be complexity, obviously, because there's many chains and many token formats, but it's like the infrastructure is kind of coming together to help deal with that more easily.
Sure. I think fragmentation, particularly on the technical standard side on ERCs, and then fragmentation of data on-chain and off-chain, I think these are 2 critical issues. Rushi, what's your take on that?
I think one thing that we're working on is interop between rollups. So as we see, there's multiple RWA chains and rollups. So if you have one asset class minted on 1L, 1L2, you want to interop with L1, L2. Right now, it's pretty difficult. So we've explored a few different things to address that. One thing is shared sequencing, where if you have multiple rollups within one ecosystem, bridges can read state from the shared sequencer itself. So that means you can do like 1 block atomic swaps or 1 to 2 block swaps, which is much more exciting than traditional bridging mechanisms. And I think, like, obviously there's better people on this panel than me on RWAs, but I think we have to, like, there is this future where the RWA future is multi-chain. Maybe you'll have one blockchain that focuses on real estate, one blockchain that focuses on like jewelry, stuff like that. So working on marketplaces that can aggregate those is kind of the future, and I think that's what Polytrade is working on.
For us, when people think RWAs, they think Plume. They basically bring any types of assets on chain, and because of that, our ecosystem is pretty robust right now. We work with different types of projects, from like collectibles, alternative assets, to treasuries, to more synthetic type projects. And now that we have over like 150 different projects, we have over $1 billion of assets in the pipeline waiting to tokenize day one, and tons of capital commitments. What we want to do is basically bring all different types of projects onto Plume, whether they're native or multi-chain. And we think that but by providing an ecosystem that is really geared towards all these different types of assets, we can really help unify the ecosystem. And on top of that, we do work with other different interoperability platforms. So we're working with different bridges. I think the main the main premise of RWAs is to really bring liquidity to where demand is. So like we're open to working with different types of projects like Movement or Hedera. So yeah, that's what I'd like to say about that.
That's great. So I have a follow-up question because I think Plume ecosystem has really grown quite fast in terms of projects building on you. What is the biggest bottleneck these projects are talking about, like for scalability? Why, or what are you guys doing about it?
Yeah, I think for us, we're building a fully integrated chain. So what that means is we handle all of the tokenization for the projects. We handle all the distribution. We also bring a lot of liquidity on chain. We have a capital markets BD team sourcing capital, and whether it's off-chain folks or on-chain folks. So for us, our core focus is really just building this ecosystem out and creating the different use cases that I think the on-chain audience is really used to now, whether it's like borrow lending, trading, working with different types of projects that they're used to. Because from our perspective, a lot of the on-chain audience right now, they're more, I'd say more crypto, in the sense that it's less institutions right now, but we're also working with the institutions, but it's all about sequencing for us. So I would say it's really building the infrastructure to let these projects come on and basically mimic the real world on-chain. Like for example, when you KYC on Binance, you're not paying a gas fee, right? So what we want to do is really optimize the chain for different different, I guess, use cases that people are used to, and in that sense, we can really start driving adoption towards the space in general.
Like EVMs, people talk about security concerns. Most of the institutions today not coming to Web3 because of security concerns. How is Movement Labs addressing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of work being done through the Hamilton Institutional Fund, as well as BlackRock. When we're talking to these partners, and in the past, yeah, security was a concern. When there's $4.5 billion lost every year in smart contract hacks, it makes it not the best place to deploy actual assets for institutional funds. So I think the work that we're doing in Movement is bringing this novel execution environment built by Facebook. For those that remember, the DM project was designed for RWAs, where they had partnerships with pretty much every bigger bank and payment provider, and the thesis was to bring access to the DM blockchain for the Facebook app. Unfortunately, to regulation, that kind of got shut down, but the thesis remains the same, where you have secure and safe programming powered by formal verification execution, which means that anytime you execute smart contracts, it checks for resource type memory safety. So all the hacks that you see on like Curve, Uniswap, the DAO are fundamentally not possible on Movement and Move execution layer. So when it comes to RWAs, institutions and individuals feel comfortable tokenizing assets with that.
Actually required, and on the infra built-up side, such large plays are required now, because otherwise institutions not gonna come here. Sabrina, you have been in this space for almost like 3-4 years since we know each other. What problems have you seen in scalability, particularly in RWA space?
From the layer one perspective, one thing that we see is there's a lot of projects trying to do similar things and having to kind of reinvent the wheel every time, right? Because there's not a lot of off-the-shelf components that you can use. So that's one area that that we're working towards. I can't give too much detail, but very soon. So being able to I mean, we've already started providing like pre-audited building blocks, like the stablecoin studio, for example, if you want to tokenize, you know, a currency or. So that's an example of one of the things that we've done. And there's, of course, the scalability issues in terms of markets that you want to address as a project. And ideally, you want to be able to roll out globally, but then you have the compliance issue that comes into play. And I work more on the compliant end of the spectrum, so that tends to be that definitely tends to be a pain point for a lot of projects. You know, they have to get licenses, et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of having access to a network or maybe a third party, like a distributor or something like that. That I think that whole stack like needs to kind of fall into place. And I would predict that it will eventually, those channels will become clearer and clearer as the space matures. So yeah, there's technical aspects, but there's more like business impediments to scalability, and there's definitely more complexity to the RWA space than to most of the like DeFi or just traditional Web3 space.
I believe one of the biggest problems is liquidity fragmentation as well, and what AgLayer and Superchain guys are trying to solve. The missing pieces we have seen as Polytrade is largely, you know, just non-availability of data. And that is kind of hindering the scalability. We are seeing that people are not able to verify the source of an asset issuer. So if you are issuing an asset and you're putting on metadata saying that, you know, this asset is vaulted by Brinks and, you know, audited by EY or whatever names, but those parties are not coming on chain to verify that claim. So that particular aspect, we've spoken to so many institutions, they are saying that, how do I make sure that there is a tokenized watch which is on chain on your marketplace? What if I buy it and I get delivered a scammy product, or maybe not at all, right? So we need these data proofs or source verification to be done by these independent third parties. I think that will install a lot of trust and probably enhance the scalability.
I think there's also an opportunity to bake in as much data as possible into the asset type, into the metadata. And so we've looked pretty long and hard at some of the security token formats like ERC 1400, and found that, okay, there are some limitations there, right? So can't say too much, but we're definitely working towards increasing the transparency of assets, you know, at the token format level.
I think we have a lot to talk about because we are kind of working on these solutions as well.
We've already done that work in the ESG space, where our tokens are they are a lot more complex than a typical like an NFT, for example. Has a lot of data, is searchable, so all the fields are well documented, and that definitely helps. For example, for a carbon credit, carbon credit that is highly transparent will be worth more on the market than a carbon credit that is just maybe linked to a PDF and then you don't know, you cannot verify whatever. So yeah, we bring in, for ESG assets, we bring in the IoT data streams, we bring in all the attributes that need to be searchable, like the vintage and everything that definitely helps create efficiency in the markets as well. I think
that's really required, yeah. So Teddy, coming back to you, when assets are being tokenized, one of the biggest concern is security. When people talk about saying that, there was a physical asset, what if an issuer comes and mints multiple digital twins and sell those assets, right? How, as a chain, you guys are making sure that that doesn't happen?
Yeah, that's a good question. For us, security is of utmost importance, and the way these assets are diligenced off-chain is very important as well. So we're working with a few, different underwriters that are qualified in the sense that they'll be, diligencing some of these assets for us with, the specific assets we're throwing through our tokenization engine. They'll be diligencing them off-chain, and in addition to that, we're creating different ways to basically handle the proof of reserves, kind of like you mentioned. It's very important to see a stream of data coming off-chain on the Plume to basically testify and attest that the asset still exists in the real world versus on-chain. And on top of that, like in case things really go south in like a black swan event, we also are working on an insurance fund idea, basically to provide, you know, safety to the different investors that are going to be on our chain as well. So
we keep seeing that every day, right? Scammers are all around in the crypto space for a long time. So, and Rushi, pretty much on the similar lines, you already answered about security on chain, but we understand that this RWA is much more than just a DeFi stuff, right? There is an on-ground, off-chain asset. And since you're building your ecosystem, are you seeing a lot of Web2 companies coming on chain saying that we will vault, we will secure, provide security, we will do the auditing? All these kind of companies are you seeing on Movement Labs now?
Well, I think it's not something that we work with directly. It's like a shoe marketplace, so they have like RWs and shoes, and one of the biggest thing for collectibles is like if you have like a pair of Jordans, making sure it's not from a scammy third party. So like you can send their shoes to one third party offshore, and then they'll verify is this correct or not, and then send like a attestation to the server that hey, this is correct and same. But I don't think that we work directly with them. It's something that B2B does.
Totally makes sense. So I think I'll touch base on a little touchy question. We have so many blockchains and protocols which are now focusing only on RWAs. How instead of, and we all know that, layer 1s, layer 2s keep fighting for TVLs, but I don't think that's a right metrics for RWAs. That was invented for DeFi. RWAs really do not qualify for TVLs. How do you guys plan to work together rather than, kind of competing with each other?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? There's a lot of layer 1s out there and layer 2s, and I think one of the ways we do it is to work on like token formats, for example, and a lot of the IP is open source, so that can be leveraged across chains. It's quite difficult to bridge RWA assets, so and it also adds a risk, especially if you do like a lock and burn type mechanism. So probably not ideal. It's probably better to have cross-chain messaging services, and then you can like atomically swap things across chains. Another area where we work very collaboratively with other chains, for example, is decentralized recovery. As RWAs are going more mainstream, you don't really expect people to have to deal with a 20-something word passphrase. So that's something that was launched recently. I mean, originally out of Hedera, but then we brought in Cardano, we brought in Ripple also, and so with this open source decentralized recovery scheme, something that we hope that will be industry-wide, not just for RWAs, but digital assets in general. So those are some sort of efforts that we try to do to grow the ecosystem together, not just like compete with each other.
Definitely. I think we have brilliant examples from Web2, right? You have central banks working in different countries. Still, a transaction is verified if nobody gets credited twice, right? So I think there's a beautiful ecosystem being generating here, and we can all learn to work together. What you actually rightly said, if there is a proper cross messaging between chains, when tokenized asset is being sold or any lending or borrowing happen against that, I think if that message is conveyed across chains, it could solve a lot of problems of duplication and all that. But yeah, Teddy, would love to hear your views on that. How are you guys planning to work together with other blockchains and protocols?
For us, the way we plan on working with other blockchains is actually in a few ways. I think one interesting way that we're working with a few other chains is actually they will be tapping into our sources of yield. And what I mean by that is, like I mentioned earlier, we are tokenizing in the pipeline a little bit over $1 billion worth of assets, whether they're solar panels, mineral rights, GPUs, and treasuries. And a lot of these chains, since we've been speaking with them from the beginning, they have a lot of idle capital left over, whether it's in their treasury or in other forms of capital. And so what we want to do is actually, provide them a source of yield to basically act as like their savings account. To provide yield back to idle capital there. So I think that's one very interesting way that's unique to Plume. And I think the other way that we're working The other way that we're working with other chains is honestly just, building a cross-chain initiative to incentivize projects to build on their chain and also ours. The way we see the RWA space is, we need to work with all the different chains to really bring more attention and really build up the vertical. So like what we're doing, for example, with Arbitrum is we're building a cross-chain initiative where we can incentivize their users to deposit into their funds in Arbitrum, and then they can come back to Plume to claim once we launch on mainnet. So there's a lot of different ways, and we're always open to working with other different chains out there.
That's quite good. Rushi, I know that you guys are doing your L2 as well. What's the plans like working with other chains? Because RWAs needs to survive on all chains together. They cannot survive in isolation.
Yeah, I think one thing we're working on is we have a stack where teams can launch their own custom rollups with our execution environment. So we're seeing certain teams come to market that are focused on RWA rollups and RWA chains, specifically in different asset verticals. So I think we have one team focused purely on real estate. It's like a New York team that has New York licenses. So we're seeing a lot of New York apartments potentially coming on chain within the next 4 to 5 months. So I think for our stance, it's enabling teams to launch customized, high throughput and secure rollups, and then putting behind the necessary marketing to get our community ecosystem behind it.
I'll probably go ahead with the last question as we're running a little bit late, but one bullish statement, Teddy, on what do you think is RWA is the next winner? Or we are all waiting for it for a long time. Is RWA the next winner for Web3?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, as we've been seeing, from tons of our partners, and we're speaking with tons of different builders, different asset issuers, different capital providers. The one main messaging we've really received from them is that they're looking and searching for real yields. Today, there's a lot of different yields, in DeFi and with Bitcoin and all those other ecosystems, and although they are great, at the end of the day, a lot of them also want to work with us because they're looking for more sustainable yields. And I think, even Vitalik touched upon it a few weeks back on Twitter. I think, the next phase of real yield is, really going to be from RWAs, and that's why I think all of us up here, we're really, well positioned to capture this next wave of capital, next wave of users. And I think with, all of the big catalysts and the market with different ETFs being approved and different institutions coming on chain, there's a pretty big opportunity for us here, and all we need to do is really work together to, help pave the lane.
Well, we're waiting for that. Rushi, what do you think?
Well, I think it's what does real world asset mean? I think it's also a horrible name. That
really funny word.
Does that imply that on-chain assets are not real world? So that's a question to address probably at some point, but I think we're in too deep. Yeah, I think it's the future is we're all on-chain tokenization, right? So I don't think that means RWAs per se as definition. I think it means just use cases. If you want to have any consumer social app, you can argue that's RWA. You can argue the DeFi app where you have T-bills. I mean, I guess that's considered RWA, but that's probably more DeFi to an extent. So I think we'll see more of an overlap between DeFi and RWA. So we don't have to say the word RWA anymore.
Sabrina, what's your take?
Yeah, I think we've gone through a couple iterations of our RWAs already, right? The STO, experimentation of a 2019-ish and on that. And we're kind of zoning into a model that works. I do think there's still going to be a bit of trial and error. I think not every asset is going to lend itself to tokenization. My neighbor's used car is, no one's going to want tokens from that, right? But obviously, I strongly believe that capital markets are migrating on chain, and that is that's where the big potential is, right? If you just look at the numbers, you look at the crypto market caps versus capital markets, and it's just orders of magnitude larger. So even if we just capture a small fraction of that, this will be a game changer for blockchain in general.
What we need is more adoption. And when I talk about adoption, it's not the Web3 adoption, because we can't force somebody to first buy Ethereum or any crypto asset to do purchase tokenized asset. Maybe we should rely on Web2 Rails to make people buy these tokenized assets easily. That way we can bring a lot of Web2 audience into Web3 and make them.
Yeah, I think we'll have we'll abstract the blockchain piece, the digital asset piece, actually, and most of your, retail adopters are going to come through their banking app, their brokerage, and maybe they will be tapping into Polytrade in the back end, but like the end user is probably not going to see it.
Amazon is Amazon, right? People go and buy the stuff. They don't care about, what is in there. So again, thank you everyone. Thanks panelists for this beautiful session, and please enjoy the remaining of the day. And thanks again.
Thank you.